They say old houses keep secrets, but what if those secrets knock back? Tonight, we uncover the chilling story of a home with a dark past, a place where a priest once battled forces he could not name. His journal, found decades later, speaks of midnight prayers, unseen watchers, and a warning carved into the final page. If you hear the knocks, it has already chosen you. What began as faint tapping at 3:15 a.m., the devil's hour, soon became a terror no lock could keep out. As we trace the priest's last days in that house, and the woman who discovered his writings, one question lingers. When the knocking comes, will you dare to answer, or will you listen and pray it moves on? The house seemed ordinary at first glance, ordinary enough for her to convince herself she wasn't making a mistake. After all, the price was too good to pass up, and the listing had been up for months with no takers. She chalked it up to superstitions and bad marketing. But the first night she slept there, the walls spoke in ways she couldn't explain. There wasn't a sound exactly, more a sensation, a low hum beneath her skin, vibrating through her bones as if the house were trying to whisper directly into her marrow. She lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, unable to shake the thought that maybe she wasn't alone. That's what made her start researching the house's history in the first place. She told herself it was idle curiosity, a pastime to keep her mind busy during the transition to a new home. But deep down, she was searching for validation, something to prove she wasn't imagining it. The peeling paint and warped floorboards were expected in an old place, but the heaviness in the air, like a wet wool blanket pressing on her chest, was not. She dismissed it each time it came, but it never really left. She couldn't describe why she felt watched whenever she crossed the threshold into the hallway at night, or why her dreams since moving in were full of whispers she couldn't understand. It was just a house. Old wood, old air, old silence. At least, that's what she told herself, until she found the name carved in the staircase. She didn't notice it until her third week there. She had been cleaning the stairs, wiping away decades of dust and grime, when her rag caught on a splinter. She bent closer, running her fingers over the wood, and there it was, barely visible under the layers of polish and time. Malachi Brennan. The letters were deep, purposeful, as though carved by someone in a hurry, but determined to be remembered. Her first thought was that it was just a former owner marking his territory, a harmless relic of someone's life before hers. But later that night, when she sat scrolling through property records on her phone, the name returned. Father Malachi Brennan. The house's history was murky. After being built in 1927, it exchanged hands a few times before being listed as temporarily occupied in 1962 by a representative of the Diocese of St. Clair. There were no sale records, no lease agreements, just the cryptic note, temporary assignment, Reverend Malachi Brennan, Diocese, and then silence. Nothing until 1978, when a new family purchased the house. A 20-year gap. She Googled the priest's name and found almost nothing. No obituary, no church records, no parish listings. It was as if he had been erased. But then she stumbled across a faded newspaper clipping archived on a genealogy site. The headline made her skin crawl. Priest sent to investigate knocking in local home missing since June. The photo was grainy, but she could see his eyes, tired, haunted. The following morning, she went to the town library, her curiosity now a gnawing obsession. She asked the librarian for any records on the house and its previous residents, and the woman's face tightened. That place, she asked softly, almost whispering, as if speaking too loud might stir something. People say it's odd. Neighbors hear things. You might not want to dig too deep. But she handed over a thin folder anyway, filled with yellowed papers and brittle clippings. One article spoke of neighbors hearing screams at night during the 60s, another of unexplained fires in the nearby woods, and one headline simply read, "Diocese remains silent on priest's disappearance." She flipped to the last page and froze. It was a police report from 1962, filed by a neighbor, heard knocking noises every night for 3 weeks. Last night, no noises. This morning, Father Brennan's car still in driveway, but no answer at door. Police checked residence, empty. No sign of struggle. She copied everything with her phone, her hands trembling slightly as she left the library. Back at the house, she couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was waiting for her to return. It was the attic that held the answer, or at least a piece of it. She had never gone up there, partly out of disinterest, and partly because the narrow staircase made her uneasy. But one rainy afternoon, feeling reckless and needing a distraction, she climbed the creaking steps and pushed open the door. The attic smelled of mildew and age, its wooden beams sagging under the weight of time. As she stepped across the dust-covered floorboards, something felt wrong underfoot. A hollow sound where there shouldn't be one. Kneeling, she pried up a loose board and found a small leather-bound book wrapped in a rotting cloth. The journal was brittle, its pages yellowed and flaking at the edges. The first entry made her heart thump painfully. "This house carries echoes of old sins. I hear them in the walls. The air smells of sulfur and despair. I was warned not to take this assignment, but someone has to stand watch." As she read further, the writing became more erratic. Words underlined multiple times, sentences that ended abruptly, drawings of strange symbols and clawed hands scratching at doorways. Then came the entry that stopped her cold. The knocking began at 3:15 a.m., always 3 knocks. At first, I thought it was someone at the door, but it follows me now. It knocks from the walls, the floors, even the ceiling above my bed. It does not ask permission to enter. It never needed it. I do not believe it wants to come in. I believe it already has. Her hands shook as she closed the journal, dust spilling onto her lap. She couldn't explain why the house felt colder, why the shadows seemed thicker in the corners. The clock on her phone read 2:48 a.m. She swallowed hard, less than half an hour, until the hour he wrote about. The devil's hour. She told herself she was being ridiculous. But when she descended the attic stairs, she carried the journal tightly pressed to her chest, like a talisman. She sat awake in bed, phone in one hand, journal in the other. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The groan of wood settling, the sigh of the wind against old windows, the faint tick of the clock on her nightstand. But beneath it all was something else, a silence too heavy to be natural. It wrapped around her like a vice, pressing into her lungs, until every breath felt shallow. She stared at the bedroom door, half expecting it to swing open. Brennan's last entry, replayed in her mind like a warning siren. Do not answer, do not move. If it knocks, it has already chosen you. Her heart pounded in her ears as the digital clock flipped to 3:15 a.m. That's when she heard it. 3 knocks. The sound of the knocks wasn't loud, but they carried a weight that seemed to ripple through the entire house. She sat frozen, muscles locked tight, her ears straining in the oppressive silence that followed. 3 measured taps, spaced just far enough apart to sound intentional. Her phone's screen lit her face in the darkness, the clock numbers glaring. 3:15 a.m. She told herself it had to be a tree branch or a neighbor's prank, but her gut churned with a deep primal fear she couldn't reason away. Slowly, she pressed her palms against her ears as if she could block it all out. But there it was again, fainter this time, or perhaps closer. Tap, tap, tap. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The journal on her lap felt heavier now, as though it were made of lead. Its pages had warned her. Father Brennan's words looping like a dirge in her head. It does not ask permission to enter. It never needed it. And yet, something in her, something naive, desperate, still clung to the thought that this was all in her mind. She kept her gaze locked on the door, her hands gripping the sheets so tight, her knuckles whitened. Another knock, louder this time. The sound seemed to bloom from inside the walls themselves. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, she sat rigid, the faint glow of dawn creeping across the ceiling as her body trembled from exhaustion. When the sun finally rose, she moved cautiously through the house, each step deliberate and measured, as though sudden movement might trigger something unseen. She examined the front door, half expecting to see dents in the wood or muddy footprints on the porch, but there was nothing, not a mark. It was as pristine as it had been the day she moved in. The quiet felt different now, not empty, but watchful, as if the house itself was waiting. She tried to tell herself it had been a nightmare brought on by stress and too many late nights reading the journal, but her hands still trembled as she made coffee, and she couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on her back. Even the daylight felt thin and fragile, unable to banish the memory of those 3 deliberate knocks. She stayed out of the house that evening, lingering at a cafe until closing, desperate to avoid another night alone. But eventually, there was no excuse left. She had to go home. She stood at her own front door longer than she meant to, keys in hand, the memory of the night before gnawing at her resolve. The lock clicked open, and she stepped inside, holding her breath, as though expecting the air itself to resist her entry. The house was silent. Too silent. The air hung thick, heavy, almost wet. She didn't turn on the lights. Something in her whispered not to draw attention. Instead, she crept upstairs in the dim glow of her phone, clutching the journal tightly. She couldn't resist opening it again, despite every instinct screaming to leave it alone. The next entry was dated June 12, 1962. It's learning. The knocking is not random. It comes only when I'm alone, when I'm weakest. Last night it came from the wardrobe. Tonight I hear it beneath my bed. I fear sleep more than death now. I pray, but my prayers sound hollow here. That night she barricaded her bedroom door with a chair and dresser, the absurdity of it lost on her in her panic. She sat awake, every muscle tense, ears straining for the faintest sound. The clock seemed to crawl, each minute stretching impossibly long. Midnight came and went. At 2:45 a.m., yea, she began whispering prayers she hadn't said since childhood, her voice hoarse and trembling. The journal lay open beside her, Father Brennan's desperate words staring back like a warning from across time. The air seemed to grow colder with every breath she took. By 3:10 a.m., her phone battery had died, plunging her into pitch-black silence. She counted her breaths, willing herself to remain calm. And then it came, 3 knocks, louder than the night before, closer. Tap, tap, tap. She pressed her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream. The sound had come from her closet. Morning found her curled up in a corner, knees drawn tight to her chest, her fingernails digging crescent moons into her palms. She didn't remember falling asleep, but the pale light streaming through the curtains was proof she'd survived the night. For now, her barricade stood untouched. The closet door remained closed, yet the sense of safety daylight once brought was gone. She understood now why Brennan's journal became more frantic with each entry. It wasn't just fear, it was the realization of an unrelenting presence that refused to leave. That afternoon she called a local priest, but his response was cautious and vague. "I don't perform blessings anymore," he said awkwardly. "Besides, if what you're describing is true, it's not something I'd want to provoke." His words sank like stones in her stomach. She didn't even ask him to clarify. Desperation drove her back to the attic. She scoured every inch, searching for anything that might explain the journal or the events tormenting her nights. That's when she found the second journal, smaller, hidden in the same loose floorboard as the first. The cover was stained darker, and the pages inside were almost illegible from water damage and smudged ink. But some words stood out. "It feeds on fear. The knocking is a warning. When it stops, it means it no longer needs to ask permission." She clutched the journal to her chest, as though it might shield her. In the corner of the page was a symbol Brennan had drawn repeatedly, a circle with 3 claw marks running through it. Beneath it, scrawled so hard the pen had torn the page, "Do not answer, do not engage. It wants acknowledgement." That night, she set her phone to record audio and left it on her nightstand, too terrified to trust her own senses anymore. Sleep was impossible. She lay rigid, staring at the ceiling as hours bled into each other. At precisely 3:15 a.m., it came again. 3 knocks, this time from her bedroom door. Tap, 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 tap. The sound reverberated through her skull, vibrating her bones as if the house itself joined in the rhythm. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing it to end, but then a new sound joined the knocks, a slow, dragging scrape across the floor, as though something heavy shifted just beyond the door. She pressed her hands over her ears and whispered Brennan's prayer over and over. When the sun rose, it didn't bring comfort. It brought a faint, metallic light that seemed to smear across the walls rather than illuminate them. She checked her phone first, hands trembling so violently she almost dropped it. The audio file was there, 6 hours long. She scrolled through until she reached 3:15 a.m., the exact time the knocks had come. The sound was faint at first, like a distant thumping heartbeat. Then, unmistakable, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Her throat tightened as the audio continued. After the knocks came the dragging sound she remembered, like something rough and heavy being pulled across the floorboards. She turned the volume up, pressing the phone close to her ear, and froze. There was breathing, slow, guttural breaths on the other side of her bedroom door. Then a voice, low, whispering, impossible to make out, except for one word that crawled into her ear like a spider. Chosen. She stopped the recording and slammed the phone face down on the table, tears stinging her eyes. This was no longer something she could dismiss as nightmares or old house noises. Whatever had haunted Brennan was now here for her. She tried to leave the house that morning, but the door wouldn't open. No matter how she turned the lock, pushed or pulled, it refused to budge. Even the windows resisted, painted shut or warped beyond movement. Panic clawed at her throat as she checked every possible exit. She even considered breaking a window, but stopped when she imagined what might hear the sound of shattering glass. The house seemed to hum around her, faint vibrations she felt through the floor, as if it were alive and aware of her fear. She backed away from the front door and sat on the stairs, clutching Brennan's journal to her chest. She opened to another page, dated just days before his disappearance. I tried to leave. The door would not open. It's not just a house anymore. It's a vessel. It holds what it invites, and it does not let go. She read the words over and over until they blurred. The sound of a creak upstairs made her jolt. Someone or something was moving in the attic. The rest of the day passed in a haze. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. She barely moved, except to bolt every door and press furniture against them. As dusk fell, she felt the air shift again, that oppressive weight returning to her chest, like a hand pressing her down. She didn't dare turn on the lights. Brennan had written, "It prefers the dark. It hides better there." She sat in the hallway, knees drawn to her chest, the journal open in her lap. Another entry stared back at her. I made the mistake of acknowledging it. When I spoke to it, even in fear, it answered. It called me by name. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. The air felt thicker, every breath labored, as though inhaling through water. And then she heard it, soft, deliberate steps above her, pacing slowly back and forth across the attic floor. By 3 a.m., the house was alive with sound. The footsteps had stopped, but faint scratching replaced them, like fingernails trailing along the walls. It came from everywhere at once: the ceiling, the floorboards, even the inside of the wardrobe across the hall. She squeezed her eyes shut and pressed her palms over her ears, rocking gently, as if motion alone could ward it off. But the sounds persisted, growing bolder, closer. At exactly 3:15 a.m., they stopped, a silence so complete it made her ears ring. And then 3 knocks. This time they came from behind her, on the wall, directly opposite where she sat. Tap, tap. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She felt heat radiating from the wall, as though something stood on the other side, waiting for her to answer. She didn't. She wouldn't. She stayed frozen, whispering Brennan's prayer in a shaky, rasping voice, until dawn began to seep through the curtains. When the light returned, she forced herself to move. She needed answers. Somewhere in this house, there had to be a reason, something Brennan missed or left behind as a warning. She went room by room, checking every corner, every crevice. In the basement, she found strange symbols carved into the concrete walls, circles intersected by jagged lines, each marked with 3 deep gashes like claw marks. Brennan's journal had drawings of the same sigil. Beneath one, in smeared ink, were the words, "This is the seal, it keeps it weak. Do not disturb." But one of the seals was broken, a deep gouge running through it, as though clawed open. Her stomach turned. Had Brennan broken it, or had something else? She backed away slowly, unwilling to linger in the basement's damp, suffocating air. As she reached the stairs, she swore she heard whispering, faint, male, repeating her name. The rest of the day blurred into a fog of exhaustion and fear. She sat on the kitchen floor with her back to the wall, staring at her phone's screen. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no escape. Brennan's journal lay open beside her, its pages a litany of despair. On the 4th night, I heard it speak. On the 5th, it touched me. On the 6th, it entered my dreams. She felt her eyelids grow heavy, sleep dragging at her like an anchor. She tried to fight it, but her body betrayed her. When she woke, it was dark. The clock read 3:12 a.m., 3 minutes to the hour. She held her breath, every muscle tensed like a coiled spring. And then it came, 3 heavy knocks, this time from under the floorboards beneath her feet. Tap, tap, tap. The knocks beneath her feet froze her blood. Each sound vibrated through the floorboards, as if something massive pressed against them from below. Tap, tap, tap. She stayed utterly still, hardly breathing. The air felt thick with static, the hairs on her arms standing on end. The journal's words echoed in her skull, louder than her own heartbeat. It learns, it moves. It will not stay where you expect it. When you hear it from below, it has found the foundation. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body felt bolted in place by a terror too deep to shake. The knocks came again, this time louder, each one sending small vibrations through the kitchen tiles. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence, complete and suffocating. She didn't move for what felt like hours, afraid even her shallow breaths would summon it again. But the stillness pressed in on her mind, warping her thoughts, until she wasn't sure whether she was truly alone. When dawn finally bled pale light through the curtains, she stumbled upstairs, her legs leaden with exhaustion. She collapsed on the bed, fully clothed, gripping Brennan's journal like a lifeline. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, but it wasn't the restful oblivion she longed for. It was a prison. She dreamt of a vast windowless room, walls covered in the same strange sigils she'd seen in the basement. In the center stood Father Brennan, gaunt and hollow-eyed, his skin stretched too tight over his skull. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear. She stepped closer, and the sound returned. Tap, tap, but louder, deafening. Brennan's eyes locked on hers, black as pitch, and she finally understood the words. You let it in. She woke with a violent gasp, sweat soaking her clothes, the taste of copper on her tongue. The clock read 2:58 a.m. Panic surged. She knew what was coming. The minutes crawled toward 3:15 a.m. Each tick of the clock, a hammer blow in her skull. She sat rigid, the journal clutched in trembling hands, whispering Brennan's prayer over and over. The house was silent, too silent, as though holding its breath with her. Then came the sound, a slow, deliberate scrape across her bedroom door. The noise dragged on for seconds, the wood groaning under unseen pressure. Her breath hitched. Then 3 knocks reverberated through the room. Tap, tap, tap. She pressed her back to the headboard, too terrified to blink. Another knock, harder this time, splintering the wood slightly. Tap, tap, tap. Then a voice, low, guttural, impossibly deep, slid through the crack beneath the door. You. The single word hung in the air like a curse. She covered her ears, sobbing silently, praying harder than she ever had before. But the thing outside didn't move away. It stayed, waiting. The hours between 3:15 and dawn felt endless. When the first rays of light finally broke across the horizon, the pressure lifted slightly, though not completely. She unblocked her door cautiously and scanned the hallway. Claw marks gouged deep into the wood. Near the floor, 3 parallel lines stretching from one end of the hall to the other. She felt bile rise in her throat. Back downstairs, she searched Brennan's journal for anything, some instruction, some hope. But the entries had grown more deranged toward the end, the handwriting jagged and desperate. It watches me from the mirror. I smashed them all. It whispered my name from the walls. I filled them with salt, but it does not care about salt. It does not care about light. It only cares that I know it is here. Her fingers tightened on the page. Then she saw the last complete entry. Tonight I will answer. I must end this. No further words followed, only pages torn out violently. leaving jagged stubs in the binding. The realization hit her like ice in her veins. Brennan had answered the knocks. Whatever he thought he could end, ended him instead. She couldn't follow the same path. She wouldn't. She spent the day gathering supplies, candles, matches, a small crucifix she found buried in an old moving box. It felt laughable, even childish, to cling to these symbols in a modern world. But she needed something, anything, to make her feel less helpless. As the sun set, she scrawled the sigils Brennan had drawn onto scraps of paper and taped them to doors and windows. It made her feel marginally safer, though a small voice in her head whispered it was all meaningless. Night fell, and the air grew heavy again. She sat in the center of her bedroom, the journal open beside her, candles flickering weakly in the thick darkness. The clock ticked closer to 3:15 a.m. Her body trembled violently. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. The first knock came early, 3:09 a.m. Tap. A pause. Tap. Another pause. Tap. She flinched with each sound, her heart threatening to burst. The knocks didn't stop this time. They grew louder, more urgent, hammering against the walls, the floor, the ceiling, all at once. Tap, tap, tap. Her candles flickered wildly, the flames stretching sideways as though pulled by an invisible breath. She pressed her palms over her ears and whispered Brennan's prayer faster and faster, but it was drowned out by the pounding. Then silence, utter, consuming silence. Her ears rang in the absence of sound. She felt the air shift behind her, a cold presence drawing close. And then a whisper brushed against her ear, so soft she almost didn't hear it. It's inside. She didn't remember falling unconscious, but when she woke, the sun had risen. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of something, watching, waiting. She stumbled to her feet, the journal still clutched in her hand, and made her way to the front door. This time, the lock turned easily. The door swung open without resistance. She stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air, as though surfacing from deep water. But something felt wrong. The street was empty. No cars, no people, no sound of birds. She turned back to look at the house and froze. In every window, she saw a shadow, tall, thin, watching her leave. She ran. She didn't stop running until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out. The cold morning air sliced into her throat, each breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the house loomed small in the distance, its windows still reflecting that impossible shadow. She didn't dare look back again. For a moment she considered calling the police. But what would she even say? That her house was haunted, that she had spent nights listening to knocks and whispers, and now something was following her. The words sounded absurd even in her head. She collapsed onto a bus bench on the edge of town, gripping the journal tight against her chest. Brennan's words felt like a lifeline and a curse all at once. If you hear the knocking, it has already chosen you. Her phone buzzed weakly in her pocket. One bar of signal. She dialed her sister's number with trembling fingers, praying for a voice to ground her, to make the world feel real again. But the call went straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. What could she possibly say that wouldn't sound insane? As the sun climbed higher, warming her frozen skin, she began to feel a creeping dread. The house had let her leave. It hadn't fought her at the door this time, but deep down she felt certain it wasn't because she had won. It was because it wanted her to leave. By midday she was walking again, unsure where to go. Each step felt heavier, her body sluggish like she was wading through water. The town felt strangely muted, as though a layer of sound had been stripped away. Cars passed, people chatted on sidewalks, but it all seemed distant, unreal. She ducked into a small diner, hoping for warmth and a few minutes to collect herself. The waitress greeted her with a tired smile and a coffee pot, but when she glanced up, the woman's face seemed to pale slightly. "You okay?" she asked softly, concern flickering across her features. She nodded quickly, forcing a weak smile, but her hands shook as she took the mug. She kept glancing toward the door, half expecting to see that shadowy figure standing outside. Instead, the street remained empty. Pulling out Brennan's journal, she flipped to the last page again. Her eyes traced his final frantic lines over and over. "Tonight, I will answer. I must end this." What had he meant? What had he faced when he opened the door? She thought of his voice in her dream. "You let it in." Had he failed? Was he still in that house, trapped somehow? The thought made her skin crawl. She stayed in the diner for hours, ordering nothing but coffee refills, as the sun began to dip behind the rooftops. Every time the door jingled, she flinched. By nightfall, the exhaustion was crushing, but the idea of checking into a motel felt pointless. The thing wasn't tied to the house. It had followed Brennan, and now it had followed her. She remembered the whisper at her ear. "It's inside." Maybe it didn't matter where she went. Maybe it had never mattered. She left the diner and wandered aimlessly through darkened streets, clutching her coat tight around her. At some point she realized she was circling back toward her neighborhood. Her steps slowed, a deep dread coiling in her stomach. Why was she going back? She should be running the opposite way, but some pull, faint yet insistent, drew her like a magnet. When she finally saw the house, her chest tightened. It stood in perfect stillness, its windows black and empty like hollow eyes. But she swore she felt it watching her approach, felt its anticipation vibrating in her bones. She didn't remember deciding to step onto the porch, but suddenly there she was, keys clutched in sweaty hands, her breath clouding in the cold night air. The wood creaked under her weight, louder than she remembered. Each sound felt amplified in the silence, echoing back from the walls like mocking laughter. She reached for the doorknob, but froze. A faint sound emanated from inside, softer than a whisper yet distinct. Her name, drawn out, deliberate, as though tasting each syllable. Her heart hammered violently. She stumbled back off the porch, her foot catching on the step, sending her sprawling into the cold dirt. She scrambled up, too terrified to feel the pain in her scraped palms. Then it came, the sound she had dreaded, the sound Brennan had warned of. 3 knocks. Tap, tap. This time they came, not from the door, but from the porch floor beneath her feet. She backed away further, her entire body shaking, tears streaming unchecked down her face. But even as she turned to run, she heard the voice again. Low, confident, amused. "Run, I'll be there too." She didn't sleep that night. She found herself sitting in a public park, under a flickering street lamp, Brennan's journal open in her lap. She read it cover to cover again, desperate for anything she might have missed. The entries told of rituals, prayers, sigils, none of which had worked. Brennan's tone shifted from hope to despair over the course of weeks, until the final pages were nearly illegible with frantic scrawls. "It has no shape, no weakness. It feeds on fear and familiarity. The more I acknowledge it, the stronger it becomes." She closed the book and buried her face in her hands. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had already acknowledged it. From the first night, from the first knock, it had her. The thought sent a wave of cold hopelessness through her. There was no priest to call, no ritual to try, no escape. If Brennan couldn't stop it, how could she? She didn't notice the faint smell of sulfur in the air until it was too late. The street lamp above her flickered, buzzed, and went out. In the darkness, she felt it before she saw it. A weight on the bench beside her, invisible yet undeniable. Her breath came shallow and fast, her eyes straining to adjust. Then, just on the edge of hearing, a whisper, "Do you see now?" She turned her head, heart in her throat, and saw the faint outline of a figure in the shadows, tall. Its edges seemed to ripple like smoke. Its head tilted as though studying her, and for one terrifying moment, she swore it smiled. The voice came again, softer this time, almost tender. "You answered." She scrambled up, her legs weak and unsteady, and stumbled into the night. Behind her, the faint sound of knocking followed on the benches, the pavement, the trees themselves. Tap, tap, tap. Always three, always patient. She didn't remember how she made it through the night, only that when the first light of dawn touched the treetops, she was still moving, feet blistered, clothes damp with sweat and dew. Every sound seemed louder in the fragile quiet of morning, the distant rumble of a car engine, a bird's sharp call, even her own ragged breathing. But the sound that haunted her most was the faint echo she couldn't shake. 3 knocks, tap, tap, tap. No matter how far she walked, it lingered just at the edge of hearing, as though carried in the wind. She stumbled into a convenience store as it opened, hands shaking as she bought bottled water and a pack of cheap energy bars. The clerk gave her a curious glance, but said nothing. She must have looked wild-eyed, hair disheveled, dirt streaking her skin. In the grimy bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. Dark circles under her eyes, a thin sheen of sweat across her forehead. But what chilled her more than her appearance was the faint shape she thought she saw behind her, a shadow in the mirror that didn't belong to anything in the room. She spun around, but the small space was empty. When she turned back, the shadow was gone. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow and haunted. She lingered in the store for as long as she could justify, clutching the journal in her lap as if it might anchor her sanity. Brennan's scrawled entries offered no solace. "I can feel it beneath my skin. It doesn't need the house. It doesn't need permission. It only needs time. And I've given it too much already." She closed the journal with trembling hands, pressing her palms to her face. How long before she felt it beneath her own skin? Before it stopped knocking and simply entered. She couldn't keep running forever. The exhaustion was bone deep now, gnawing at her muscles and mind alike. And still, she felt the pull of the house, a tether, invisible but unbreakable. It wasn't done with her. She wasn't done with it. Part of her hated the thought, but another part whispered that answers, if any still existed, waited only there. By mid-afternoon, she found herself heading back toward the edge of town, each step heavier than the last. The house appeared like a bruise on the landscape, dark and silent in the distance. As she drew closer, an acrid smell curled into her nostrils, smoke, faint but unmistakable. Her stomach twisted. She broke into a run, panic surging in her chest. But when she reached the yard, she saw no flames, only the blackened remnants of symbols she'd scrawled on the walls, burned away as though scrubbed with fire. The front door stood ajar. It had been locked before. Now it seemed to beckon. Her every instinct screamed to turn and flee, but her legs carried her forward, up the steps and into the darkened hallway. The air inside was thick and stifling, heavy with the metallic tang of blood and ash. The house felt different, emptier, and yet impossibly full, like lungs holding a breath too long. She called out softly, though she didn't know why. The sound of her own voice felt foreign in the stillness. No answer, only the faint creak of floorboards, as though something shifted upstairs. She gripped the journal tighter and moved cautiously through the hall, her breath shallow, ears straining for any sound. Every door she passed seemed to exhale cold air, a chill that raised goosebumps along her skin. In the kitchen, the table bore deep scratches, 3 parallel grooves running the length of the wood. Her mouth went dry. She turned to leave, but the sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. This time from the basement. She froze, her heart hammering. Brennan's warning rang like a siren in her head. Do not engage, do not descend. It waits below. But something in her, stubborn, desperate, pushed her forward. She couldn't leave again, not without knowing. The basement stairs groaned under her weight, each step echoing into the darkness below. The smell grew stronger, smoke, sulfur, and something sickly sweet, like rotting flowers. At the base of the stairs, she saw the sigils again, this time scrawled larger on the floor in black soot. In the center sat a chair, and on it, a tattered priest's collar, yellowed with age. Her breath caught Brennan's. She stepped closer, her shoes smearing the delicate lines of the sigils. The air shifted instantly, growing colder, thicker. She heard it then, breathing, low, ragged, coming from the shadows in the far corner. She squinted into the darkness, her stomach knotting. 2 pinpricks of pale light blinked open, eyes watching her. She stumbled back, her foot catching on the bottom step. The eyes moved closer, impossibly smooth and silent, until they were just feet away. A voice spoke, deep, resonant, filling the room though its source remained hidden. You've read his words. She couldn't reply. Fear locked her jaw, stole her breath. The voice continued, almost gently. You carry his burden, and you still believe it's his. The eyes blinked, vanishing, then reappearing on the other side of the room. It was never his burden. It was his invitation, as it was yours. She felt a pressure building in her head, behind her eyes, like hands gripping her skull. She screamed and bolted up the stairs, the voice following her like smoke, curling through the air. Run, knock, run, knock. You'll never be rid of me. Back in the hallway, she slammed the basement door and shoved a chair against it, though a hollow part of her knew it was useless. The house trembled faintly under her feet, a subtle vibration, like a heartbeat. She fled to the attic, clutching the journal so tightly, her fingers ached. Dust swirled in the weak sunlight, filtering through the cracked window. There in the corner, she saw something she had missed before, a small locked chest. She dropped to her knees, fumbling with the rusty latch, until it snapped open. Inside lay a single page torn from Brennan's journal, its edges stained with dark fingerprints. The words were scrawled hastily, some letters smeared as if written in a shaking hand. If you hear it in 3 places at once, it's no longer outside, it's under your skin. She felt her stomach twist violently, and then it began. Tap from the attic window. Tap from the floor beneath her knees. Tap from inside her own skull. She stumbled backward from the chest, her breath catching in her throat. The knocks echoed inside her head now, thudding against the walls of her skull like fists on a locked door. Tap, tap, tap. Her eyes squeezed shut, her fingers digging into her scalp, as though she could claw the sound out of her mind. For a terrifying second, she felt the sensation of movement beneath her skin, a ripple, a twitch, like something was shifting beneath the flesh of her arms. She gagged, swallowing bile, the nausea building with each pulse of that internal knocking. Brennan's final words thundered through her thoughts. "It's under your skin." She didn't remember crawling back down from the attic. She only remembered the bruises blooming on her knees, the splinters in her palms, and the sense of being watched by something not bound by walls or floors anymore. The house wasn't the prison. She was the vessel now. Whatever this presence was, it had taken root inside her, around her, through her. The tapping didn't come from the windows, the walls, or the floor anymore. It came from her own heartbeat. She collapsed in the hallway outside the attic, her vision tunneling at the edges. Sleep pressed on her like a drug, not gentle but suffocating. She fought to stay conscious, muttering the only prayer she still remembered under her breath, like a chant. She didn't trust sleep anymore. Brennan had said it found him more easily when he dreamed, but her body gave in. The journal slid from her lap as her head hit the wall, and then she was somewhere else. Not a dream, but something deeper. The air in the space was thick and grey, with no ceiling, no floor, only endless fog. Shapes moved in the distance, tall and thin, with limbs too long and heads too narrow. They moved without walking, drifting closer, and ahead of her stood Brennan, or what was left of him. His eyes were gone, two black pits, and his skin had the brittle sheen of wax. He raised a shaking hand and pointed behind her. She turned and saw herself, standing with her back to the fog, eyes closed, lips moving as if in prayer. But it wasn't a prayer, it was a knock. Tap, 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 and then she woke, screaming. The house was silent when she opened her eyes, but she didn't believe in silence anymore. She stared at the ceiling, trembling, every muscle tensed for a sound she could no longer predict. It could come from anywhere now, and it didn't have to wait for 3:15. That hour had been a formality, a courtesy. Now it knew it didn't need rules. She stood slowly, her joints stiff, and her body aching. Her skin still crawled with phantom sensation, like cobwebs brushing across her shoulders. She went to the mirror in the hallway and stared hard at her reflection. Her face was pale, hollow, her eyes bloodshot, but it was her. And yet, in the mirror, her chest rose and fell out of sync with her breathing. She stepped back. Her reflection blinked half a second too late. She turned away, refusing to look again. Brennan had written about this too. It mimics poorly at first, but it learns fast. Soon I won't know which one of us is still me. The idea of leaving again crossed her mind, but she knew the truth now. There was nowhere to go, not without bringing it with her, not without spreading it. Brennan had tried to end it by facing it alone. She now realized it wasn't enough. Something stronger had to be done. Something final. But what? Fire, ritual, death? She wasn't ready for that answer yet. Not if there was still a piece of her that was hers. She made her way to the basement, heart pounding. Sigils had been broken, but maybe she could restore them. Maybe it wasn't too late. She scoured the space for chalk, paint, anything she could use. In a storage bin, she found a small can of red marker spray, left by the previous owners, probably for renovations. Her hands trembled as she crouched and began to redraw the circles and lines, copying Brennan's symbols from memory. She didn't stop to think. She just moved, tracing each mark carefully, whispering apologies to whatever force might be watching. And as she drew, she heard it again, whispers from behind the walls, but they didn't sound like one voice anymore. They sounded like many. They chanted in unison, low and steady, her name, over and over. Her fingers faltered as the spray paint hissed across the concrete. Symbols looked crude and shaky, nothing like Brennan's confident lines, but it was all she had. The voices grew louder, and her vision blurred. Blood dripped from her nose, spattering the center of the circle. She stumbled backward and wiped it away with her sleeve, only to find more running down her chin. Her body was beginning to break down, buckling under the pressure of something not meant to inhabit flesh. She dropped the spray can and collapsed to her knees in the circle, sobbing, her body heaving with dry cries. The journal lay open beside her, pages flapping in the draftless air. She reached for it, her hand trembling, and touched a page she hadn't noticed before, stuck to the inside of the back cover. It was a letter, short, scrawled. "If you're reading this, I failed. You are next. You are the door now. Do not let them knock through you." That line shattered what little composure she had left. She curled into herself, whispering apologies, prayers, curses, all of it tangled in one desperate breath. She wasn't strong enough. She didn't know what she was fighting. How could she stop something that lived between dreams and mirrors, beneath skin and breath? Something that wore voices and shadows like masks. The floor thudded beneath her. Tap, tap, tap. From beneath the sigil itself, she scrambled up and stepped back, heart racing. The center of the circle bulged upward, ever so slightly. The concrete cracked. Tap, tap, tap. Something was knocking from the other side. Not at the door, not at the walls, at the seal, beneath her feet. Brennan had tried to bind it. She was standing on the place where he had made his last stand, and now it wanted out. Through her body, through her voice, she screamed and fled up the stairs, the sound of the knocks growing more rapid, more violent. Tap, tap, tap. The basement lights shattered. The door slammed shut behind her. She braced herself against it. The journal clutched tight, her breath coming in ragged sobs. All around her the house trembled. Walls cracked, light bulbs flickered. The air itself seemed to groan under the weight of something immense, ancient and angry. And then, as quickly as it began, the shaking stopped. A stillness fell over everything. She stood alone in the hallway, chest heaving, heart pounding. The house had gone quiet again, but the quiet didn't feel like surrender. It felt like permission. The silence didn't comfort her. It pressed on her chest like a lead weight, suffocating in its completeness. Every instinct screamed that quiet in this house wasn't safety, it was attention. The way a predator watches its prey, pause in a clearing. Her trembling hands clutched the journal tighter, smearing her own blood across its leather cover without noticing. She staggered toward the front door, desperate to try again, to flee, to breathe air untainted by this place. But when her hand wrapped around the doorknob, her fingers recoiled. It was warm, too warm, almost feverish, as though a living pulse throbbed inside the metal. She ripped her hand back, her chest heaving in shallow, panicked breaths. Behind her, a faint creak came from upstairs. A footstep, slow, heavy. Then another. She couldn't move, couldn't think. Her legs locked as her eyes tracked the sound of unseen weight crossing the floor above her. It stopped directly over her head. The house seemed to exhale around her. Then came 3 knocks. Tap, 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 tap. This time, they didn't echo from wood or stone. They reverberated inside her skull. Each one sent a spike of pain down her spine like lightning. Her knees buckled, her shoulder slamming against the doorframe as she struggled to remain conscious. A voice whispered in her ear, so close she could feel the breath against her skin. "We're almost home." She screamed and stumbled back into the hallway, clutching her head as though she could force the sound out. Her reflection in the hallway mirror flickered, not in sync with her, but half a second delayed, its lips curling into a grin. Hers never made. She turned away, refusing to look again. Brennan's words echoed from the journal like a curse. The mirror is no longer a reflection. It's a window. If it smiles, it's too late. She staggered toward the stairs, every nerve screaming to leave the house, but knowing she couldn't. This wasn't about doors or windows anymore. She wasn't running from the house. She was running from herself. But her body felt foreign now, every movement heavy, as though pulled by invisible strings. When she reached the top of the stairs, she saw it. Her bedroom door stood ajar, faint light leaking from within. She hadn't left any lights on. She forced her feet to move, one step at a time, though her body screamed to retreat. At the threshold, she paused. The air in the room was thick, damp with the scent of rot and smoke. Her journal lay open on the floor, pages flipping rapidly, as though caught in a breeze. But there was no breeze. A tall, thin figure stood in the corner, its back turned to her. It was motionless, but impossibly still, in a way no living thing should be. Her lips trembled as she forced out a whisper. "Who are you?" The figure didn't move. Instead, her own voice answered from behind her. "You know me already." She spun, but the hallway was empty. She looked back to the figure, and it was gone. The room was empty now, except for the journal and the overwhelming stench. She ran to the window, pulling at it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. Neither did the second or the third. Panic clawed at her throat as she realized she was trapped again, not by locks or doors, but by something far more absolute. She dropped to her knees beside the journal, flipping through pages with trembling hands. Brennan's final scrawled note leapt out at her. "I hear them in my veins now. 3 times they knock before they open. 3 knocks, 3 seals, 3 hosts." Her blood turned to ice. Was she the third? Was Brennan the first? And if so, who was the second? A faint sound rose behind her. Breathing, slow, heavy, inhuman. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The voice spoke, low and guttural, every syllable vibrating through her bones. "The door is open now." Her body seized. Her limbs stiffened. She could no longer feel her fingers clutching the journal, no longer sense her own heartbeat. Her eyes darted wildly, but even they began to lose their freedom, moving in directions she didn't choose. In the mirror across the room, her reflection rose to its feet, smiling wide. Too wide. It tilted its head, as though curious, then lifted one pale hand and knocked gently on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. She tried to scream, but her mouth wouldn't obey. The reflection's grin widened, splitting impossibly, until it seemed to engulf its entire face. The mirror's surface rippled like water as the figure stepped through, not out, but into her. She felt it pour into her mind, her lungs, her veins. She was drowning in it. Memories she didn't recognize flashed in her skull. Faces, places, languages she never spoke. She was sinking, her own voice buried under a chorus of others whispering, "We are home." Her hands rose slowly, not by her will, but by something inside her testing its new vessel. She watched them flex, twist, clench into fists. Somewhere deep within, she screamed silently. The house fell still, and then she moved, not as herself, but as the thing wearing her skin. It walked to the door, the knob now cool under her hand. It turned easily. As she stepped outside, the first bird call of morning echoed weakly through the yard. She paused on the porch, tilting her head back to breathe in the damp air. A smile crept across her face, not hers. From deep within, her voice whispered a single thought. Not aloud, not to anyone. Just a cold realization pulsing through her mind like poison. I am the knock now. The sun felt wrong on her skin. Too warm, too real. It sank into her flesh like molten lead, and beneath it she felt the faintest twitch, like tendrils shifting just under the surface. She kept walking, not because she wanted to, but because her legs carried her forward without pause, her feet steady on the cracked pavement of the neighborhood street. The air smelled different now, faintly sweet, faintly metallic, as though every breath carried a memory of blood. Houses blurred past, their windows glinting like watchful eyes. She wondered distantly if anyone inside saw her and thought she was ordinary. But then she caught her reflection in a passing car window. It smiled. She didn't. The grin was faint, almost imperceptible, but it stretched her lips a fraction too wide. She didn't recognize her own face anymore. She pressed a hand to her chest and felt her heartbeat steady, even, but three distinct pulses followed in quick succession. Tap, tap, tap. Inside her, she almost laughed. Or maybe the sound wasn't hers at all. She didn't know where she was going until she arrived. The town's church loomed in the distance, its bell tower rising like a finger pointing to a sky gone pale and empty. She stopped at the base of its stone steps, staring up at the weathered cross. Something deep within her recoiled violently, a shudder running down her spine like ice water. Her feet resisted the first step, but then the smile came again, not hers, and her legs moved, climbing with mechanical precision. Each step felt like dragging lead weights. At the door she paused, her hand lifted to knock, but she caught it mid-air, muscles trembling with effort. She didn't want to knock, not here, not on holy ground. The other part of her, stronger, colder, forced her knuckles forward. One knock, two. The third caught in her throat, like a swallowed scream. She ripped her hand back, clutching it tight against her chest. The warmth of her palm burned like fire. A sound behind her. She turned sharply. A priest, young, slight and pale, stood in the entryway, his brow furrowed. "Can I help you?" he asked softly, his voice tentative but kind. She tried to answer, but her lips wouldn't form words. Instead, they curled into that same not-quite smile. The priest's eyes flickered with unease. "Are you all right?" She wanted to scream. "No, run, don't let me in," but her voice failed her. The thing inside shifted, stretching unseen, pressing against her ribs. She felt it watching through her eyes, evaluating, calculating. The priest stepped closer. She stumbled back down the steps, clutching her head, forcing out a broken whisper. "Don't answer." The words sounded like gravel in her throat, foreign even to her own ears. His frown deepened. "I don't understand." "Answer what?" The thing inside her trembled with dark amusement, curling like smoke in her chest. She could feel its hunger pressing against her skin, whispering of doors and thresholds, and how easily they swing open. She ran. The streets blurred past in streaks of grey and gold, her breath coming ragged as her body fought itself. Her limbs jerked awkwardly, caught in a war between her will and something deeper. In the reflection of a shop window, she saw her stride falter, not human anymore, but jagged, insect-like for a split second before righting itself. The smile was wider now, her teeth bared like a predator's. She turned her head away, refusing to see more. She ducked into an alley and pressed her back to the cold brick, clutching the journal tight to her chest. "There's still time," she whispered to herself. "There has to be." But deep within, the voice echoed with cold certainty. "There isn't." She slammed her head back against the wall, willing herself to focus, to remember anything Brennan had written that might help. A mirror reveals what the eyes will not. Do not trust what smiles back. The words chilled her. She had seen the smile in every reflection. If it had already spread so far, what part of her was left? A rustle at the alley's mouth drew her eyes. A man tall with weathered skin and a faded jacket watched her warily. "Hey, you okay?" he called, taking a cautious step closer. She flinched, her fingers digging into her palms. "Stay back," she hissed. Her voice cracked, a raw edge creeping in like a second tone beneath her own. The man's eyes narrowed. "Do you need help?" Her body tensed. The thing inside her was paying attention now. She could feel it testing her muscles, preparing to stand, to speak, to answer. "Go," she croaked. "Go before I..." But the other voice took over, smooth and velvety. "Before I..." "What?" It purred from her mouth. The man froze, his face draining of color. "Oh God," he whispered. He backed away slowly, his eyes locked on hers. She smiled. No, it smiled, and raised a hand in a mocking wave. He turned and ran. The voice inside her chuckled. "It's too late to warn them. You're already knocking." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold ground, clutching her head, as though she could dig the voice out by force. But every thought now came layered. Her own memories braided with countless others. Faces she didn't recognize flashed behind her eyelids, some pleading, some screaming, some silent with terror. "These are your brothers and sisters," the voice whispered. "We are one vessel, one door." She sobbed, rocking back and forth in the alley's shadows. She was losing. She could feel her own thoughts thinning, her voice drowning beneath the chorus. Brennan's warning clawed at the edges of her mind. "If the knocking reaches your bones, there is no return. You will be the one knocking next." She pressed her palms to her ears, as though to block out the sound, but the knocking was louder now, not from walls or floors but from inside her skull. Tap, tap, tap. She forced herself up, staggering into the light of the street. There had to be a way. Brennan had failed, but maybe she could succeed where he didn't. She would go back to the church, not to enter, but to end it. Fire, salt, something, anything to sever the link. She turned the corner and froze. Across the street, in the reflective glass of a shop window, she saw herself standing perfectly still, but she wasn't standing. She was walking. The reflection's head tilted, grinning wider than her jaw should allow. Its lips moved silently, but she understood. It's my turn now. The glass rippled like water, and then it stepped through. It stepped out of the glass like liquid shadow, its movements fluid and unhurried. The reflection's grin didn't fade as its feet touched the cracked pavement, leaving faint black smudges where it stood. She froze across the street, her breath catching in her throat. The thing wearing her face tilted its head. studying her with a predator's curiosity. Its eyes shimmered faintly, not with light, but with the suggestion of countless other eyes staring from within. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The air seemed thicker, heavier, pressing her lungs flat, as if she had already drowned. The thing took a single step forward. Tap. Its footfall echoed unnaturally loud in the stillness. She felt the vibration rattle up her own spine, her teeth clenching against the sound. Another step. Tap. Again that hollow thrum in her chest, almost synchronized with her heartbeat. The voice inside her, her voice but wrong, spoke aloud now, low and guttural. "We warned you not to answer." Her hand shot up to cover her mouth as she stumbled backward. She hadn't spoken, not willingly, but the sound had come from her throat. The thing in the street mirrored her perfectly, raising its hand to its lips and tilting its head further, its grin widening. She turned and ran, her feet pounding against the cracked sidewalk. Behind her came the faint sound of knocks. Not footsteps, not pursuit, just tap, tap. She dared not look back. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to put as much distance between her and the shadow wearing her skin as possible. But even as she fled, she felt the connection tightening like a noose. The further she went, the louder the knocks grew, not from behind, but inside her chest, her ribs resonating with each hollow beat. She ducked into another alley and pressed herself against the wall, her breath ragged and shallow. A faint coppery taste coated her tongue. Blood. She wiped at her nose and saw dark crimson on her fingertips. Her body was failing, breaking apart under the strain of dual occupation. Brennan's journal lay heavy in her coat pocket, its pages full of warnings she hadn't heeded. It doesn't take you all at once. It wears you down. It knocks and knocks and knocks, until your will splinters. She fumbled it out and flipped to the final page, praying for some overlooked salvation. Instead, she found new handwriting scrawled beneath Brennan's last entry, a line she hadn't seen before. "It's not outside anymore. You are the door." Her stomach twisted violently as a realization took hold. She wasn't being hunted. She was being used. She was the vessel now, carrying it wherever she went. A sudden sound behind her made her spin, heart hammering. A cat darted from the shadows, knocking over a loose can. Relief lasted a heartbeat before the knocking began again, this time from the brick wall at her back. Tap, tap, tap. She pressed away, but her body wouldn't respond. Her muscles stiffened, locked by an unseen force. The voice inside spoke again, smooth and calm. "It's easier if you stop fighting." She gritted her teeth, forcing her fingers to curl into fists. "No," she whispered, but even that single word felt like it took every ounce of strength she had left. A laugh bubbled up from her throat, not hers, and for a terrifying moment she thought she felt her lips stretch into another grin. She staggered out of the alley into the empty street, the sound of her own laughter following her like a predator's call. The church bell rang faintly in the distance. She clung to the sound like a lifeline, each chime cutting through the fog wrapping her mind. The church, it had to mean something. Holy ground. Sanctuary. Or maybe it was a trap, the thing inside her delighting in her desperation, guiding her to the one place where it could truly take hold. She stumbled forward regardless, her steps erratic, her vision tunneling at the edges. The air grew colder as the church came into view, its doors closed, its stained glass windows dark. Her breath misted in front of her as she reached the steps and collapsed against them, too weak to stand. Inside her chest, the knocking grew frantic now. Tap, tap, tap. like a prisoner, pounding on their cell door. She pressed her palms to her sternum, tears streaming down her face. "Stop," she begged. "Please stop." Her voice echoed into the still night. And then, silence. For a moment she thought she had won. The knocking had ceased. The voice had gone still. Even her own heartbeat seemed to quiet. But then she realized, too late, that silence wasn't victory. It was arrival. A figure stepped from the church's shadow, tall and robed, its face hidden beneath a deep hood. It moved with no sound, no hesitation, crossing the ground between them with inhuman grace. She tried to scramble away, but her legs refused to move. The figure knelt in front of her, and though she couldn't see its face, she felt its gaze pierce her skull like burning iron. A voice, low and ancient, rumbled from beneath the hood. "You are open now." And then came the final knock. The third knock didn't sound in the air or against the stone steps. It resounded from deep within her chest, vibrating through her bones like the toll of a distant bell. Her vision rippled as if she were staring through water, the world bending and shifting until the church seemed to loom impossibly tall above her, its stained glass windows twisting into grotesque faces. The figure knelt before her, hands pale as bone emerging from the folds of its robe. One skeletal finger traced a circle in the air, and she felt it, an invisible ring tightening around her throat. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her lungs burned with held breath. "The door has opened," the figure said. Its voice no longer human, but layered with countless tones. Male, female, childlike, ancient. "You were always meant to be the threshold." She clawed at her neck, her nails drawing blood, but the constriction didn't ease. The air around her seemed to hum with unseen energy, and faint whispers, voices she didn't recognize, began to rise like a distant chorus. The figure pressed its hand to her forehead. Ice shot through her skull, and images flashed behind her eyes. Brennan's journal burning, his blood staining the church floor, her own reflection grinning in every mirror. But then she saw something new. An unfamiliar house, a child sitting alone in the dark, tiny fists knocking 3 times on the floorboards. The image shifted. Another home, another knock, another host. She realized in horror that she wasn't the first. She wasn't even the last. She was one of many, a chain stretching back centuries. "Each of you believes you can end it," the figure whispered. "But each of you is just the next step." The pressure on her throat released suddenly, and she gasped, collapsing onto the cold stone. Her chest heaved, but the relief was short-lived. The figure rose to its full height, towering over her like a shadow given form. It extended a hand, not in kindness, but in command. "Rise, it's time." She fought it with everything left in her. Her body trembled, muscles locking as she resisted the unseen pull. "No," she croaked, her voice raw. The figure tilted its head, amused. "You misunderstand. This is not permission. This is inevitability." Her arms moved without her will, planting her hands against the step. Her knees buckled and straightened. She rose like a puppet, her movements jerky and wrong. Inside her head, the chorus of whispers grew louder, voices speaking in languages she didn't know, all saying the same thing. "We are here." Tears streamed down her face as her body turned toward the church doors. They swung open with a deafening creak, revealing a cavernous darkness beyond. The scent of rot and burning wax rolled out, making her gag. Her feet moved forward. She tried to dig her heels into the stone, to fight, but her muscles no longer listened. "I won't let you," she whispered weakly. The figure laughed. The sound was not human. Not animal, but something vast and hollow. You already have. Inside the church, the air was thick and suffocating, heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. Candles lined the pews, their flames flickering black instead of gold. Shadows twisted unnaturally on the walls, forming shapes that writhed like living things. At the altar stood a massive wooden door that hadn't been there before, its surface covered in symbols that pulsed faintly, as though alive. Each knock she'd heard over the past nights now seemed to echo from it, overlapping endlessly. Tap, tap, tap. The sound pressed against her ears like a physical force, making her stagger. Her body dropped to its knees in front of the door, her hands rising to touch its cold surface. The moment her fingertips made contact, pain seared through her like lightning. She felt her memories peeling away, layer by layer, devoured by something vast and hungry. Names, faces, laughter, gone. In their place came new memories, dark, endless corridors, screaming voices, and countless hands reaching from the shadows. She wasn't herself anymore. She was them. The door began to vibrate violently, and a single crack split its surface. From within came a sound like rushing wind, but colder, hungrier. Her mouth opened without her consent, and her voice, layered now, dozens of tones stacked atop one another, spoke. The seal is broken. We are free. The crack widened. A hand emerged from within, long and skeletal, its nails scraping deep gouges into the wood as it pulled. She tried to pull back, to resist, but her own hands gripped the door tighter, blood running from beneath her fingernails where they dug into the surface. A scream rose in her throat, but it never left her mouth. The voice inside her laughed. There is no scream left for you. The hand withdrew, and a faint glowing eye peered through the widening crack. It saw her, and in seeing her, it saw the world beyond. She felt it happen then, the true opening, the door within her mind shattering like glass. Her chest arched as her body became the conduit. The church walls trembled, candles flared black, shadows pooled and poured outward like smoke, spreading across the floor toward the open doors. And in the distance, faint but growing louder, came the sound of knocking. Not 3 taps anymore, countless fists pounding at countless thresholds, echoing through the streets, the homes, the hearts of everyone nearby. Tap, 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 unceasing. The chorus of voices inside her head screamed in triumph. She felt herself sinking, slipping further from her body, as something else, something vast and endless, stood in her place. She was gone. The door split fully now, light pouring through in jagged beams, not golden light, but something cold and void black that seemed to devour color as it spread. She felt her mouth stretch wider than should be humanly possible, jaw cracking audibly as the voices inside her howled in triumph. The sound wasn't just in her ears. It was in the walls, the floor, the very air vibrating with a collective shriek of liberation. Her body arched unnaturally, fingers clutching the altar steps until the nails broke and bled. From deep within the rift came shapes, indistinct at first, like smoke twisting into grotesque limbs and faces, all eyes and teeth. One of them emerged fully, dragging its warped body into the church. It was tall, skinless, its form a mass of writhing muscle and tendons. Where its face should have been was only a void that pulsed faintly with the rhythm of a heart. Tap, tap, tap. It looked at her, not with eyes but with presence, and she felt her remaining self crumble. The creature hissed, a sound like boiling water poured onto ice, and others followed. Dozens, hundreds. The church filled with them, shadows given flesh, moving on all fours, scaling walls and ceilings like grotesque insects. One passed by her crouched form, its jagged hand caressing her cheek. "We thank you," it whispered in her mind, its voice a chorus of overlapping tones, childlike, ancient, male, female, and something beyond all of them. She tried to close her eyes but found she no longer controlled even that. She was a passenger now, locked in a body that had been repurposed, her existence reduced to a faint echo, drowned in a sea of alien thoughts. The thing using her lips smiled wider, her voice spilling out in a mocking prayer. "The door is open, let all who knock enter." Outside, the sound of knocking multiplied, radiating across the town. Windows rattled, doors vibrated. Families woke in terror as faint taps echoed from within walls, beneath beds, behind closet doors. Tap, 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 and with each sequence of 3, something else slipped through, too quick to see fully, but leaving behind icy draughts and the stench of rot. The town's street lamps flickered, their light dimming under an invisible weight. Dogs howled. Birds took frantic flight from trees. Somewhere a child began crying, their voice carrying faintly to the church steps. The things inside her chest, her new passengers, stirred hungrily. She felt them stretching into her muscles, her tendons, her lungs, as if trying on their new vessel. And with each movement, she disappeared further. "You thought you could contain us," they whispered inside her skull. "You thought wrong." The robed figure from before knelt again at her side, its hood falling back to reveal her own face, or at least a version of it, paler, the eyes hollow sockets, lips cracked and bleeding. "I tried to warn you," it whispered, blood dripping from its jaw. "We are the knock, and now so are you." It reached a skeletal hand to her forehead. The moment its fingers brushed her skin, visions flooded her. Generations of hosts, men, women, children, each falling in turn. The priest whose journal she found, clawing at his own throat in his final moments. A mother smashing mirrors one by one, as her reflection grinned back at her. A soldier screaming in his bunk, as unseen fists pounded his ribcage from within. The door had opened countless times before. Each time someone thought they could end it. Each time they became the next link in an unbroken chain. Her tears burned like acid, streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't the heroine. She wasn't the savior. She was just another door. Another failure. She screamed within her own mind, a silent wail no one could hear. But the thing wearing her skin laughed. It stood stretching her arms as though testing new wings, and turned to the altar. The pulsing crack in the wooden door yawned wider, and more shapes poured out. An endless river of shadows with gleaming teeth and void black eyes. "We are Legion," the thing said aloud, her voice resonating through the cavernous church. It stepped forward and pressed its hand flat against the cracked door. "We have always been." The first of the creatures slipped past her and out through the open church doors, its spindly limbs carrying it unnaturally fast. Others followed, swarming into the streets, with inhuman shrieks that rattled windows and sent distant car alarms screaming. The thing inside her grinned as it watched its kin disperse, spreading through homes and buildings like a plague. She wanted to shut her eyes, to not witness the horror she had unleashed, but her eyelids no longer obeyed. She was forced to see, to feel. Every door they passed through, she felt. Every knock answered, she heard. Every scream she absorbed. Her mind began to fracture under the weight of too many senses, too many lives snuffed out or devoured. She had become the conduit, the bridge between worlds, Somewhere in the deepest part of her mind, a faint whisper struggled to rise. Her own voice. Fight it. You can still fight it. But the laugh that followed wasn't hers. It belonged to the Legion. You are no longer strong enough. You never were. Her reflection appeared again in the black candle flames, grinning wide. Its eyes pulsed like open wounds. It spoke her name softly, mockingly, and she felt her identity unravel, syllable by syllable. First her name, then her face, then her memories, swallowed whole like embers in a storm. The last thought she had before vanishing completely wasn't of her family, her home, or even her own fear. It was Brennan's final warning, echoing like a curse. If you feel the knock in your bones, it's already over. And then, silence. It began with a knock. 3 faint taps at the edge of consciousness, soft as moth wings, yet loud enough to wake him from a dead sleep. He lay frozen in his bed, heart pounding in his ears, the darkness of his room suffocating and absolute. Tap, tap, tap. Again, louder now, reverberating not from the door, but from inside the walls. He swallowed hard, forcing his lungs to draw a steady breath. The sound came once more, closer this time. Tap, tap, tap. He thought he saw a faint shape in the corner, a suggestion of movement, but when he blinked, it was gone. He told himself it was nothing, a dream, the settling of old pipes. But deep down, something primal stirred. It was the same uneasy instinct animals feel moments before the earth quakes. The air felt heavier somehow, charged with a wrongness his waking mind couldn't name. Then came a whisper, low and intimate, curling into his ear like smoke. Do not answer. He bolted upright, sweat chilling his skin, hands gripping the bedsheet so tightly, his knuckles whitened. His eyes darted toward the bedroom door. It stood ajar, though he distinctly remembered closing it before going to sleep. Beyond it, the hallway was pitch black, the faint moonlight from his window failing to reach that far. His gut twisted violently. He knew, without knowing how, that something was out there. Waiting, he forced himself to breathe, in and out, slow and steady. But then the knocking started again, this time from the floor beneath his bed. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike vibrated faintly through the mattress, sending a cold shiver up his spine. He threw his legs over the edge, his bare feet brushing the cool wood floor. The moment they touched, the knocking stopped. Silence pressed in, like a heavy hand. He rose to his feet cautiously, every muscle tense. The house felt alive now, each creak and groan, like a breath, exhaled from unseen lungs. He stepped into the hallway, his hand trailing along the wall for balance, as his eyes adjusted. The air was colder here, the kind of biting chill that seemed to seep into his bones. Shadows clung unnaturally to the corners, pooling in shapes that almost resembled crouched figures. He told himself it was his imagination, but his pace quickened anyway. Halfway down the hall, he heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it came from behind him. He spun, heart hammering. Nothing there, only darkness. But he felt it now, a presence at his back. Watching, waiting, a faint smile seemed to curl across unseen lips in the blackness. His breath came faster, clouding faintly in the chill. His reflection in the hallway mirror flickered, just for a second. Its lips moved silently, whispering something he couldn't hear. He turned away quickly, refusing to look again. Brennan's voice echoed in his mind, though he had never read the journal. Do not trust what smiles back. The knocking followed him down the stairs. It wasn't consistent anymore, not 3 taps at a time, but scattered, random, almost impatient. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Long silence, tap. Each sound felt closer, as if the source was descending through the house with him. When he reached the living room, he stopped dead. His front door stood wide open. A breeze carried in the faint scent of rot and something metallic, iron or blood. The street outside was empty, eerily still. No wind, no insects, no sound at all. He wanted to step back, to retreat to his room and lock the door, but his legs moved forward instead. 1 step, 2, 3. He stopped at the threshold, peering into the darkness beyond. The street lamps flickered faintly, their light weak and yellowed. Then they went out all at once. Darkness swallowed the world outside, and from it came a whisper, not in his ears, but in his skull. Invite us. He slammed the door shut with shaking hands, twisting the deadbolt until it clicked. His chest heaved, his skin cold with sweat. But the knocking began again, instantly, this time on the other side of the door. Tap, tap, tap. He staggered back, heart pounding so hard, it felt like it might burst. This isn't real. I'm dreaming. The door rattled violently, cutting off his thought. The knocking grew louder, more forceful. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. His eyes darted to the window. A pale handprint smeared across the glass from the outside. Fingers impossibly long and thin. A faint outline of a face pressed close to the pane. Eyes hollow and mouth stretched into a grin too wide to be human. He backed away slowly, his stomach churning. The thing outside tilted its head, watching him like a curious predator. Then it knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the living room floor. He pressed his palms to his ears, rocking back and forth, whispering frantic prayers he barely remembered from childhood. Our Father, who art in heaven. But even as he recited the words, he felt the air shift, heavy, thick, like the weight of countless unseen bodies pressing against the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping voices speaking in dozens of languages, but all saying the same thing. We are here, we are many, let us in. His vision blurred as tears filled his eyes. He knew instinctively that this was no ordinary haunting. This was something older, hungrier. The journal's last warning rang in his mind, though he'd never read it. The knock is not asking permission, it's announcing arrival. And then, without realizing how or why, he found himself standing again. His hand reached for the front door's lock, not by his will, but by something else moving him like a marionette. His fingers brushed the deadbolt, and a jolt of cold shot up his arm. He gasped, trying to pull back, but his body wouldn't listen. The whispers grew deafening now, flooding every corner of his mind. His reflection in the window grinned wider still, its hollow eyes locked on his. In a final moment of clarity, he thought of his childhood, of warm summer nights and laughter, of a life before this darkness. And then his fingers turned the lock. The lock clicked. The sound was deceptively soft, but it carried the weight of finality. His hand fell limply to his side, trembling as though he'd expended the last of his strength, resisting whatever force had moved him. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The house remained silent, still, almost suffocating in its unnatural calm. Then came the first step. Not his, not from inside. It was outside the door, slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy. The boards of the front porch groaned under a weight far greater than any human's. A long shadow fell across the gap beneath the door, stretching out in unnatural angles that didn't match the faint moonlight. He stumbled back, breath quick and shallow, his spine pressing hard against the living room wall. He wanted to run, to hide, but his legs refused to move. His ears filled with the sound of his own heartbeat, and beneath it, faintly, the whisper of voices. Not one, many, a cacophony. "You've answered." The door handle turned slowly, the brass creaking, as though reluctant to yield. His stomach lurched. He wanted to scream, but his voice caught in his throat like a swallowed stone. He pressed his palms to his ears again, shaking his head violently. "This isn't real," he whispered. "It isn't real." But the voices laughed, low and guttural, layered and wrong. "We are as real as the bones in your body, and now we are in them." His chest constricted painfully. He clutched his shirt front, fingers curling into the fabric, as he felt a rhythmic pulsing, not his heartbeat, but 3 distinct thuds deep in his ribs. Tap, tap, tap. The sound vibrated through his entire frame. His vision blurred as the door creaked open a fraction. Darkness beyond, then pale fingers curled around the edge, impossibly long, and tipped with cracked black nails. A face appeared in the gap, not fully formed, more a suggestion of features within a mass of shifting shadow. Where its eyes should have been were twin voids, hollow yet heavy with presence. Its grin was wide enough to split its face in 2, teeth needle-thin and glinting like wet bone. It didn't speak. It didn't have to. Its mere presence spoke volumes in his mind. He could feel it stretching into him, its awareness brushing against his memories, rifling through his thoughts like a thief sifting drawers. Images flashed behind his eyes. His childhood bedroom, his grandmother's funeral, his first kiss. And then those same images corrupted, the bedroom walls bleeding, his grandmother rising stiffly from her coffin with hollow eyes, his first kiss's mouth stretching too wide as a black tongue slipped past her lips. He wrenched himself away from the visions, but his body didn't follow. He was rooted to the floor, his breath fogging the cold air that now seeped from the open door. The thing stepped over the threshold. The air changed instantly. The house felt smaller, warped, its dimensions subtly wrong like a dream skirting the edge of nightmare. The wallpaper pulsed faintly, as though hiding veins beneath its floral patterns. The floorboards beneath his bare feet felt warm, too warm, almost feverish. He pressed himself harder against the wall, his nails digging into the plaster. The creature's shape flickered with each step, shifting between forms. A towering humanoid draped in shadow, a crawling mass of spindly limbs, a hunched figure with too many eyes. It stopped in the center of the room, its head cocking unnaturally far to the side. He felt its gaze, not with his eyes, but deep inside, probing, tasting the corners of his soul. The voices returned, louder now. "Your door was easy. You kept it unlocked." He tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, but his lips refused to move. Instead, his head turned of its own accord to the hallway mirror. His reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite him. Its eyes were entirely black now, its mouth curled into that wide, inhuman grin. It lifted a hand slowly, waving mockingly. Then it spoke, its voice his own, but overlaid with a dozen others. "You're the vessel now." His body jerked violently, his back arching as if invisible strings were pulling him upright. He screamed silently as his hands rose, palms outstretched. The thing in the living room mirrored the motion. Shadows poured from its fingers like ink in water, flowing across the floor and crawling up his legs. The cold burned, searing his skin as it spread. He thrashed, but his movements were clumsy, distant, like fighting underwater. The whispering grew deafening. Faces formed in the inky shadows around him, some screaming, others smiling serenely. He recognized none of them, yet somehow he knew they were like him. Former vessels, each one hollowed out, their identities stripped away and replaced by something older. His reflection laughed, pressing its blackened palm flat against the other side of the mirror. You were warned not to answer, but you did. They always do. The shadows surged upward, wrapping around his chest, his throat finally pressing against his face. His scream was swallowed whole as darkness forced its way into his mouth, his nostrils, his eyes. He felt his thoughts unraveling, his memories shattering like glass. His name slipped from his grasp first, then his face, then his voice. He was being erased, piece by piece, until only the knocking remained. Tap, tap, tap. The thing inside him smiled. It didn't take long for the thing inside him to test its new vessel. His feet moved, slow at first, then with predatory certainty, carrying him across the living room. His own hands, no longer under his control, flexed experimentally as if savoring the pull of tendons and muscles. Shadows clung to his skin like a second layer, twitching in strange patterns that reminded him of insects scuttling beneath translucent flesh. The reflection in the hallway mirror followed every movement perfectly, but its grin grew impossibly wider, eyes black pits swallowing all light. From deep inside, a faint voice struggled against the tide, the last fragile piece of him. Don't let them. But the thing wearing his body only chuckled, its voice now an amalgamation of hundreds layered together. You are gone. The door stands open. The house seemed to exhale, walls creaking and groaning as if adjusting to a new occupant. Lights flickered weakly, then dimmed to a faint orange glow. It tilted his head, listening. Outside, the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the quiet street, neighbors stirring, unaware of the presence now watching from behind their windows. The whispers inside him swelled, overlapping voices forming a single thought: expand. His hand twitched. The front door swung open again, though no wind stirred. The cool night air smelled faintly of soil and decay, and with it came a sound that turned his stomach, a chorus of faint knocking from every direction. Tap, 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 from beneath parked cars, from inside the drains, from the walls of homes where families slept soundly, blissfully ignorant of the thing now staring at them through glass and wood. He stepped outside. The street was deathly quiet. Streetlights flickered overhead like dying stars, casting long, fractured shadows. His bare feet left dark prints on the cracked pavement, each mark steaming faintly, as if seared into the surface. The houses around him seemed to lean away, their shutters rattling softly, even in the absence of wind. He could feel them watching, everyone inside, their fragile human hearts thumping in their ribs. He turned slowly, savoring the sensation of proximity. The voices urged him onward, low and insistent. So many doors, so many thresholds. Let us in. His hand raised, palm outstretched toward a small blue house across the street. Its windows reflected him faintly. His body, but not his face. The thing within grinned wider as it whispered in his mind. This one. The first knock wasn't loud. Tap, but it resonated. Inside the blue house, a light flicked on. A child's voice called faintly from within. Frightened, a dog began barking, its deep woofs edged with panic. He raised his hand again. Tap, tap, 2 more strikes, each stronger, each vibrating the air like distant thunder. The dog's barking turned to a whimper. The child's voice rose in pitch, calling for its mother. He felt their fear like heat against his skin, their panic feeding the thing wrapped tight around his bones. It pressed him forward, closer to the house, his hand now inches from the door. With every step, the wood beneath his palm seemed to thrum, alive and aware of what approached. The whispers grew louder in his skull. "We're hungry, so hungry." His mouth opened, words spilling out not in his voice but in theirs. "Invite us." Inside, the child's cries ceased abruptly. Silence. The air shifted again. The thing inside him cocked its head, listening, then it stepped back. Not yet. It spoke the words through his lips, but they weren't meant for the house. They were for the others, the ones creeping unseen through alleys, slipping beneath doors, and knocking faintly at windows. Tap, tap, tap. The chorus grew louder, swelling into a rhythm that echoed across the entire neighborhood. It wasn't knocking anymore. It was a pulse, a heartbeat, the heart of something vast and ancient, and ravenous, pressing against the thin veil of this reality. He felt it now fully, the legion that had been waiting, watching for centuries. Not spirits, not demons in any way, he understood. Something older, the true architects of fear, and he was their herald. His reflection in the window changed again, no longer a perfect mimic. It now wore a hooded robe streaked with dried blood, its face pale and gaunt with hollow eyes glowing faintly red. Brennan's voice, though mangled and layered, echoed faintly from its mouth. I tried to close the door once too. The figure raised a skeletal finger, pressing it against its lips. But the knocking never stops. His hands lifted of their own accord, forming a sign he didn't recognize, but one that made the walls of every house in sight vibrate. He felt hundreds of pairs of eyes turned toward him, families staring at their doors, clutching loved ones tight, as the faint knocking continued. Tap, 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 tap. It smiled. Tonight, the voices whispered, we eat. It began all at once. The knocking spread like wildfire, from one house to the next, from windows to walls, from ceilings to floorboards. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike carried an impossible weight, vibrating deep in the bones of every soul in the neighborhood. Dogs howled, their voices cracking with terror before falling silent, as though smothered. Children screamed in the arms of parents too afraid to move. The air itself felt thick, viscous, clinging to skin like a cold sweat. Street lamps popped one by one in cascading darkness, plunging the entire block into a pitch blackness, so deep even the stars seemed to retreat. And in the silence between knocks, faint whispers threaded through the air, hundreds of voices layered upon each other, speaking words no one could understand, words that felt wrong to even hear. We are at the threshold. The thing wearing his body moved forward, barefoot across the pavement. Shadows trailed him like oil slicks, crawling unnaturally against the flow of gravity. It raised a hand again, pointing toward another house where a family huddled tight in their living room. Their door shuddered with each sequence of 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. A baby wailed. The father pressed a shaking hand to the door, whispering prayers under his breath. But they didn't matter. Not anymore. The door handle rattled violently as the thing's grin widened. The voices inside his head swelled into a single deafening chorus. Let us in. With a final surge, the door burst inward, not with force, but as if it had simply lost the will to stay shut. Darkness poured in like floodwater, and the family's screams were cut short in an instant. It spread from there. House after house fell silent, each consumed in turn. The thing's pace never quickened. It didn't need to. The Legion moved ahead of it, through cracks, through pipes, through mirrors. No threshold was sacred, not doors, not windows, not even the thin veil of sleep. People woke, gasping in their beds, only to find figures standing at the foot, whispering their names in dozens of voices all at once. Others never woke at all, their dreams turning black as hands pulled them under. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was everywhere now, a rhythmic heartbeat for an invasion centuries in the making. And he, what was left of him, could only watch from somewhere deep within his own skull, a tiny fragment of self screaming into the void, unheard and unseen. The reflection, his reflection, but not walked beside him now, grinning with eyes like coals. "This is how it ends," it said simply, almost kindly. "Every door opens eventually, every lock rusts, every mind cracks." Its voice grew quieter, more intimate. "You are not the first, you will not be the last. You are only the newest doorway." He tried to fight back, to push against the current, but his will was a dying ember. Each attempt felt weaker than the last. He could only watch as his body turned and raised both hands to the sky. The air vibrated with the force of countless knocks, and somewhere deep below the town's streets, the earth itself groaned, as if something enormous shifted beneath it. "The threshold widens," the Legion whispered. The first of them fully emerged. Then, no longer shadows, no longer suggestions. They came as they were, grotesque, skinless things, their forms a sick parody of human anatomy. Elongated limbs, eyeless faces, mouths filled with rows of jagged teeth that clacked in anticipation. They crawled, slithered, walked, and even flew on wings, too tattered to support their bloated bodies. The air reeked of rot and burning iron. The ground shook as their numbers swelled, the streets filling with their writhing mass. They did not charge, they did not roar, they simply moved, into homes, into cars, into the open mouths of the sleeping. Their hunger was not frenzied, but meticulous, deliberate. They had waited centuries. What was the rush? And still the knocking persisted. It wasn't confined to the neighborhood anymore. Miles away, people woke in terror as their walls trembled with faint taps. Cities began to report mass hallucinations as whole apartment blocks filled with the sound of knuckles rapping at impossible hours. In hospitals, patients screamed about the black shapes crawling out of vents. Airplanes reported strange vibrations in their hulls mid-flight. Tap, tap, tap. The sound spread like an infection, carried in dreams through screens, over phone lines. Some tried to escape, but where could they run when the thing knocking wasn't outside their homes but inside their bones? The voices grew louder, deeper, until the words themselves cracked reality. "We are here." In the darkness of the street, his body turned slowly, surveying the growing army of shadow flesh creatures pouring into the world. His face, his, but no longer stretched in a grin that reached from ear to ear, teeth, too sharp, too many. His mouth opened, and the Legion's voice poured out, hundreds speaking as one. "The door is open, the feast begins." Morning came with a heavy silence, a silence that swallowed everything whole. The sky was an oppressive shade of grey, blocking out the sun, as if the world had decided not to wake. Streets once alive with voices and footsteps now lay deserted and cold. Cars sat abandoned, doors left ajar, engines silent, as if their owners vanished into thin air. The houses along the street were dark and still. Curtains fluttered faintly in the cold breeze, but no sound emerged from behind cracked windows. It was a silence so profound it felt alive, thick enough to choke on. Standing in the center of the cracked pavement, clutching a rusty kitchen knife with trembling hands, she struggled to remember who she was. Her bare feet were scraped and bleeding, the pain distant compared to the emptiness growing inside her. The last fragments of memory flickered like dying embers. Her home, a man's voice, a child's cry, and then the knocking. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed, relentless and hollow, replaying in her mind like a curse. She had been asleep when it started, and now the world was broken, consumed by a darkness she could no longer escape. The memory hit her hard, 3 precise knocks, echoing from the front door. She'd been holding their daughter close, whispering soft lullabies to drown the terrible noise. Her husband had gone to investigate, voice low but tense, asking her to stay put. She remembered the way his footsteps had faded down the hall, then the sudden bone-chilling scream, the sound of shattering wood, then silence so complete it pressed against her eardrums. After that, there was nothing. Or perhaps something else, something watching her in the shadows, brushing cold fingers across her skin. She ran, or thought she did, fleeing into the night with her daughter cradled tight. But standing now amidst the ruin, the memory fractured, and she wasn't sure if she had truly escaped. A slow, cold tapping echoed beneath her skin, not her heart, but something darker, older. The knocking followed her, patient and unyielding, promising that the door would never truly close. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, each one clouding faintly in the chilly air. Though the season was wrong for cold, she gripped the knife tighter, knuckles whitening, but it felt useless, an object of desperation, not defense. She had seen the thing that came through the door, a tall, impossibly thin shadow, with too many joints, a grin stretching impossibly wide. It never spoke, but the knocking was its language, each rap a promise of doom. The sound was patient, relentless, as if it knew the inevitable, that every door opened eventually, and every soul was a doorway waiting to be unlocked. Her eyes darted nervously, as the fog curled like smoke between broken streetlights, her heart pounding against her ribs like a warning drum. Somewhere in the distance, a dog whimpered. The night felt alive, waiting, watching. She was no longer alone. Ahead, a figure slowly took shape through the grey mist, and her hope surged like a flame before crashing down into cold ash. Another survivor. She stumbled forward, voice cracking from disuse, a desperate plea escaping her lips. But the figure did not respond. It stood unnervingly still, arms hanging stiff at its sides, its face impossibly smooth and featureless. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, only pale skin stretched too tightly across a blank surface. Yet she felt the smile, not on the face but inside her head, a sickening warmth spreading like poison. The knife slipped from her grasp as the figure tilted its head, listening to the faint rhythm beneath her skin. Tap, tap, tap. The tapping echoed inside her skull, unraveling memories she wished to forget. Her husband's limp hand, her daughter's frightened cries, the stench of decay filling every room. Terror and hopelessness slammed into her all at once, and she turned on trembling legs, sprinting away from the nightmare stalking her. Her bare feet slapped against cracked concrete, the cold biting through skin, each step pounding through her exhaustion and fear. The knocking followed relentlessly, faint but constant, like a heartbeat woven into the very fabric of the night. She dared not look back, afraid to witness the horror creeping closer. The chill deepened as she fled through twisted streets until she reached the remains of the church. Its roof had collapsed. Charred beams sprawled like broken ribs against a blackened sky. The wooden doors lay shattered, splinters scattered across cracked stone steps. Above the entrance, scrawled in what looked like ash or dried blood, 3 words burned into her soul: "The door is open." Her knees buckled, pain exploding through her legs, and she sank to the ground, trembling and breathless. The message was not just a warning, it was a summons. Something ancient had crossed the threshold, and it was hungry for more. As she crouched, clutching the cold stone steps, the tapping grew louder, reverberating beneath her skin with unnatural strength. Her thoughts spiraled into darkness as the whispers began, indistinct voices overlapping, chanting in languages she did not know, but felt bone deep. They spoke of doors opened too wide, of thresholds broken by careless hands, and of a hunger that would never be sated. The knife was useless now. It was a symbol of fragility in the face of something endless. She tried to will herself to stand, to fight, but her body betrayed her, crumpling beneath the weight of despair. Yet in the depths of her terror, a single spark of defiance flickered. If only she could warn others. If only she could stop the knocking before it claimed them all. But the tapping was patient, unrelenting, and she knew in her heart the terrible truth. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And so she remained on those broken steps, the cold seeping into her bones, listening to the relentless knock echoing in the world beyond, knowing that the demon waiting in the shadows had found a way inside, not just the house, not just the town, but the very fabric of her soul. The knock was no longer outside. It was inside. It was everywhere, and it would never stop. The church stood like a wound in the quiet town, its broken roof gaping open to the sky, dark and raw. She forced herself up the cracked steps, every movement heavy and reluctant, as if the building itself resisted her approach. Inside, the scent of damp wood and ash lingered, mixing with something far fouler, an acrid tang of decay that clung to the air. The pews were shattered and scattered, splinters strewn like bones. Light filtered through the collapsed roof, in uneven shards, casting long, trembling shadows across the cracked stone floor. As she moved deeper into the sanctuary, the knocking began again, not from outside, but from within the very walls. Tap, tap, tap. It vibrated through the floorboards, the pews, the altar, each tap slow and deliberate, echoing in her chest like a heartbeat. She pressed a hand against the cold stone, willing herself not to listen, but the sound pulled at something buried deep inside her. A warning from a place she couldn't quite name. Near the altar, she found an old leather-bound book lying face down, its pages yellowed with age and edges curled. The title, embossed in faded gold letters, read simply, "Exorcisms and Warnings." Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing dense, cramped handwriting that filled every page. The journal belonged to the priest who had once served this church, a man who had spent years battling a darkness that no one else could see. His words painted a chilling portrait of the knocking, an ominous signal he called the devil's hour. The entries described nights filled with terror, of families terrorized by unseen forces, and a presence that preyed on fear itself. The priest's last entry was scrawled hastily, ink smeared and words broken. At 3:15 a.m., the knocking begins. The devil's hour. Do not answer. It is not a visitor, but a herald. The door is never truly closed. Her breath caught as she read, heart hammering. This was the key. The warning she had long ignored. As she traced the words with a trembling finger, a sudden chill swept through the church, as if the walls themselves shuddered. The knocking grew louder, resonating through the rafters and into her very bones. Tap, tap. She looked up, eyes searching the shadows cast by the broken roof. Shapes flickered just beyond the edge of vision, figures crouching, watching. Her pulse quickened, muscles tightening in fear. The church was no sanctuary anymore. It had become a threshold, somewhere just beyond the veil. The darkness waited patiently, feeding on the fear and the silence. She closed the journal abruptly, her mind racing. If the knocking was a herald, then what had it announced? What was coming through that open door? The answer felt like a scream trapped behind her ribs. Determined to find some way to fight back, she rifled through the priest's belongings scattered on the altar: a tattered stole, a rusted crucifix, a vial of dark congealed liquid. Each object seemed to pulse with a heavy weight, a history soaked in pain and struggle. She clenched the crucifix tightly, feeling the cold metal bite into her palm, a small comfort against the overwhelming dread. Then, from the darkest corner of the sanctuary, came a whisper, not carried on the wind, but inside her mind. "You cannot stop what has begun." The voice was layered, ancient, many yet one, and it chilled her more deeply than the cold air. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping the crucifix as the knocking shifted, coming now not from outside, but all around her, vibrating through the stone and wood like a living thing. Tap, 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 tap. The church doors slammed shut with a force that rattled the stained glass, cutting off the feeble light. Darkness pressed in like a living weight, and in that moment she realized she was utterly alone. Alone except for the knocking, for the unseen presence waiting just beyond sight. Her breath caught in her throat as shapes began to coalesce in the gloom, shadowed figures emerging from the edges of her vision, their eyes glowing faintly with a red, malevolent light. They did not speak, but their hunger was clear. The knocking was a summons, a signal that the boundary had been breached. She raised the crucifix, voice trembling as she whispered a prayer learned long ago, a fragile shield against a darkness older than memory. But the shadows only advanced, the tapping growing more insistent, more urgent. Tap, tap, tap. Her mind raced, searching for any hope, any way to push back the tide. The priest's journal whispered warnings of rituals, prayers, and wards, but she was no priest. Her voice cracked as she spoke the words aloud, fighting panic with desperate faith. Yet the shadows laughed, a sound like broken glass, grinding against stone, and the knocking became a deafening storm. It filled the church, the street, the very air around her, wrapping tighter like chains. In the growing chaos, she glimpsed the reflection of the church's shattered windows, her own face twisted in fear, and behind her, countless shadowy forms pressing closer. The door was open, and the legion was flooding through. In that moment of crushing despair, a faint light flickered deep within her chest, a fragile ember of hope. She clenched the crucifix harder, her voice rising in a cry that shook the very foundations of the church. The knocking faltered, the shadows recoiling slightly, as if repelled by something unseen but powerful. The voices whispered one last warning. The door is open, but not unbreakable. Breath ragged, heart pounding, she knew this battle was far from over. The knocking would return, the shadows would come again, but for now, she stood defiant at the threshold, clutching the last fragments of faith against a darkness that sought to consume all. The night stretched on, thick with silence that screamed in her ears. The church had become a cage, its broken walls no longer a refuge, but a prison holding back the tide of darkness, pressing just beyond. The faint glow of her trembling candle cast shadows that danced like ghosts across the shattered pews. Every creak, every breath of wind felt like a summons, a reminder that the knocking, the ceaseless tapping was waiting to return. She clung to the crucifix as if it were her last thread to sanity, whispering prayers whose words felt both ancient and fragile. Outside, the world had changed. No birds sang, no distant laughter reached her ears. It was a hollow shell, a place where fear took root and grew like a cancer, feeding on despair. She had read the priest's warnings again and again, but they offered no comfort, only the knowledge that the knocking was a herald, a promise of what was to come, and she feared with every fiber of her being that what was coming could not be stopped. Her thoughts drifted back to the journal's final entries, words scrawled with desperation and fear. The priest had described a night not unlike this, when the knocking began at 3:15 a.m., the devil's hour. He wrote of how the sound grew louder, more insistent, as if the very walls were calling out to something hungry. The priest had tried everything, prayers, symbols, rituals, but each night the darkness crept closer. He spoke of doors opening on their own, of shadows slipping through cracks and gaps, of loved ones changed beyond recognition. And then, his final chilling words, "The knocking never ceases. It waits, it watches, it comes for all." She realized with a sinking heart that she was living that final night. The knocking was no longer just a sound, it was a force, a living presence feeding on the fear it had unleashed. The candle flickered as a sudden draft swept through the church, carrying with it a faint, acrid smell, like burnt flesh and old stone. Her skin prickled, and she turned sharply toward the altar. The shadows had shifted, coalescing into forms that seemed to move of their own volition. Figures with elongated limbs, faceless heads, and eyes that glowed faint red. They lingered just beyond the candlelight, watching, waiting. Her voice trembled as she spoke a prayer, but the words felt hollow, powerless against the ancient evil surrounding her. The knocking grew louder, now not just from the walls but inside her mind, an endless, insistent rhythm that pressed against her thoughts. Tap, tap, tap. The sound seemed to reach through the years, echoing from the priest's own terror to her own living nightmare. She understood then that the knocking was not merely a warning, it was an invitation. A sudden sharp sound made her flinch, a creak from the ruined choir loft above. She held her breath, listening as the knocking echoed louder in the rafters. Tap, tap, tap. Her heart pounded in her chest, every muscle tense. Slowly, a shape descended from the shadows, tattered robes trailing behind it, face obscured in darkness. It moved without sound, graceful and terrible. The knocking followed its every step, a sinister accompaniment to its advance. She raised the crucifix, voice breaking as she demanded it leave, but the figure paused, head cocked as if amused. It whispered, a voice layered with many tones, both old and young, cruel and sorrowful. The door is open, we are here, and you cannot stop what is coming. Fear rooted her to the spot as it stepped into the faint light, revealing eyes empty yet burning with infernal fire. She stumbled back, desperation flooding through her veins. Her mind screamed for escape, but the church had become a tomb, every exit swallowed by shadow. The knocking grew louder, filling every corner, every crack, until it became a pounding storm inside her skull. Tap, tap, tap. With a final defiant cry, She began to recite the exorcism rites from the priest's journal, words of banishment, of fire and light. Her voice cracked, wavering between hope and despair, but the darkness recoiled, writhing as if scalded by the sound. The figure hissed, its form dissolving into a swirl of black smoke, retreating momentarily into the corners of the ruined church. She sank to her knees, exhausted but alive, clutching the crucifix like a lifeline. The knocking lessened, but she knew it was only a reprieve. The dawn's first pale light crept through the broken roof, casting long shadows across the ruined sanctuary. The knocking had not stopped, far from it, but it was distant now, a fading echo on the wind. She rose unsteadily, feeling the weight of exhaustion and sorrow pressing down on her. Outside, the world was still broken, but she clung to the fragile hope that the door could be closed again. The priest's final warning echoed in her mind. The knocking never ceases. It waits, it watches, it comes for all. She understood now that the battle was not just for one night, one house, or one town. It was eternal. The knocking was a curse, a call, and a promise. And somewhere in the shadows beyond, it was waiting for the next door to open. The streets outside the church were not the same as when she had entered. The world had shifted, warped under the weight of something vast and malevolent. Fog curled like skeletal fingers around abandoned cars, streetlights flickering weakly before dying completely. Each house she passed stood dark and silent, yet she could feel eyes watching from behind their curtains, hundreds of unseen faces pressed against glass, their whispers carried faintly on the wind. Tap, tap, tap. The sound followed her like a shadow, a constant, patient rhythm that never sped up, never faltered. It wasn't coming from any one place anymore. It was everywhere beneath her feet, inside the walls, even within the hollow of her chest. She pressed the priest's journal tightly to her body, its pages her only shield against the encroaching dark. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. As she turned down a narrow alley, she saw them, shadows moving unnaturally against the walls, shapes without faces but with long skeletal fingers that scraped softly across the brickwork. One figure stepped forward, impossibly tall, its joints bending the wrong way as it walked. Though it had no mouth, she felt its grin in her mind, a cruel, endless stretch of jagged teeth behind her eyes. It raised a hand and the knocking surged louder, pressing against her skull like a drumbeat. Tap, tap. She stumbled backward, gripping the crucifix until her knuckles ached. "You can't come in," she whispered, her voice trembling. But deep down she feared the truth. They already had. The creature's form wavered like heat on asphalt, melting into the air as it stepped closer. From somewhere above, a chorus of voices began to chant, layered and overlapping. Words in a language too old to recognize yet horribly familiar in her bones. "The door is open. We are here. You are next." Her breath caught as every window on the street rattled violently, glass panes bowing inward, as though straining to hold back an unimaginable force. She turned and ran, feet pounding against cracked asphalt, the sound of pursuit silent but certain. Even as she fled, she knew the truth. She didn't want to face. This was not a hunt. There was no need for speed. The knocking didn't chase. It waited, because doors always opened. Eventually, she reached the edge of town, as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, though no light came with it. The sun remained hidden behind thick, swirling clouds. Ahead, a lone house stood untouched by the ruin. Its windows glowed faintly with warm light. Hope flared painfully in her chest as she staggered toward it. Maybe someone had survived. Maybe someone could help her finish what the priest had started. She reached the porch and raised her fist to knock, then froze. 3 faint taps echoed from within the house. Tap, tap, tap. Her blood turned to ice. The sound wasn't asking for entry, it was answering. Slowly, she lowered her hand and stepped back, breath shuddering in her throat. From behind the door, a voice whispered, her own voice soft and distorted. "We've been waiting." Her legs refused to move. The porch felt like quicksand beneath her feet as the world twisted subtly around her. She tried to scream, but the sound caught in her chest, smothered by the thick, heavy air. Then the door creaked open just a fraction, and a thin sliver of darkness spilled out, colder than ice, blacker than night. Within it, she glimpsed shapes writhing, impossible geometries, eyes that blinked sideways, mouths stretching too wide. The crucifix in her hand burned hot, searing her palm as she pressed it against her chest. She forced her legs to move, stumbling away from the house, back toward the road, but the knocking followed, growing louder with every step. Tap, tap, tap. She didn't know how long she ran, minutes, hours, or eternity. Her bare feet were raw, leaving bloody prints in her wake. The road seemed endless, looping back on itself in impossible ways. The world was no longer the one she had known. Time twisted here, distance lied. Every turn brought her back to the same street, the same houses, the same whispers behind every closed door. Her strength waned, and she collapsed to her knees on cracked pavement. The priest's journal fell from her grasp, pages fluttering open, as if caught by a phantom breeze. She stared at the words, blurred by tears and blood. The knocking never stops. Once heard, it cannot be silenced. The door is open. A sudden hush fell across the street. The knocking ceased. Even the whispers went still, leaving only the sound of her ragged breathing. She looked up slowly, heart pounding, as a figure stepped into view at the end of the road. It was cloaked, its hood deep enough to swallow all light, and though no face was visible, she felt eyes like burning coals pierce her soul. The figure raised a skeletal finger and pressed it to where its lips should have been, a shushing gesture. Then, slowly, it raised its other hand and knocked 3 times against the air itself. Tap, tap, tap. The sound resonated like a bell tolling in her bones, each tap a hammer striking against the fragile glass of her sanity. The figure spoke, not aloud, but directly into her mind, its voice layered and ancient. "We are not here to take. We are here to be let in. You are our door." And then she understood the final truth. The knocking had never been outside. It had always been within. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey into the mystery of the knocker was a priest who warned about demons. What began as a simple investigation into an old house's past soon unraveled into a story of ancient darkness and unstoppable forces. The knocking. It never truly stops. It waits patiently at every threshold, reminding us that some doors are better left unopened. If you're intrigued by tales that blend history, horror, and the unexplained, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We dive deep into stories like this, exploring every shadow, every whisper. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, some knocks aren't just knocks, they're warnings. Good night.